Hello, everyone. I'm Kevin Gosztola. I'm the host of this channel and also a journalist and press freedom advocate. And I'll let some of you join the broadcast before I get rolling with the update that I have on the breaking news of the day, the major development in Julian Assange's extradition case, which is that the uh, appeal hearing, this limited appeal hearing, was granted for WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange. Again, go to thedissenter.org, and there you will find updates and reporting. And later today, there will be a dispatch from Mohammed Almazi, who the dissenter hired to cover the proceedings. He's a London based reporter. We've collaborated with Mohammed, and I'm very glad that we will have his breakdown, his coverage of what unfolded. That will come later. But I'm here to sum up what happened and maybe less detail but broader strokes. Make sure those of you who follow my discussion of this case, my regular updates, that you're able to understand what just took place. And there will be those of you out there that are thinking, is this good or bad? Or it doesn't really make a difference. They're just punting and kicking this all down the road. Uh, Fair reactions to a case with charges that should have long ago been dropped. But if you go to the dissenter, and if you're so inclined to support the dissenter's work, I would ask you that you donate here. Donate here to make sure we can hire and continue to hire reporters like Mohammed to make sure that we're able to cover. Mohammed was hired because I was denied access to the High Court of Justice, their video link here in the United States. I was ready to watch and follow proceedings at 4:30 a.m. in the morning in Chicago, and that's not allowed anymore. Although that's how I've covered proceedings before. They are now engaged in denying access to dozens upon dozens of international reporters if they do not travel to England or Wales. They could actually go to England or Wales and be in England or Wales, access a video link from England or Wales, and not go to the courthouse. And that would be okay to the court because primarily what they want to be able to do is threaten you with jail if you do not follow the court's rules. And so, since they have no power to hold me in contempt from here in Chicago, where I am, they are no longer going to credential me as a reporter for the Assange case. I'll try again in the upcoming hearing to get access and see if anything changes, but this has become the position of the court in a case that has tremendous importance for global journalism. So, we'll see. We'll see what happens. And I welcome you all to this broadcast this morning. Normally, I'm not broadcasting this early in the morning. And I also want to just take a moment to thank you, Kat, for your donation in support of this coverage. And those of you who are here following, I'm always appreciative of your presence. I don't think I'm going to stay here too long. I have to edit Mohammed's article and get that published on the Dissenter, particularly after this press conference that's happening. I understand there are people from Assange's legal team that will be speaking to the news media about the decision of the British High Court of Justice today. But let's get into it. I'll stop hemming and hawing. The development here is that the British High Court of Justice granted a limited hearing, a limited appeal hearing. It was already limited, but It's going to be on the issue of the First Amendment and the fact that Julian Assange would likely be prejudiced at trial due to his nationality because he does not have First Amendment rights as a foreign national, and those First Amendment rights would not be available to discourage or make the U.S. prosecutors think twice about bringing this kind of a case against him. So the idea being, if he was a U.S. citizen, that perhaps there never would have been charges issued against Julian Assange. And that's a argument that his lawyers would like to be able to make at trial. And it seems that he would not have those First Amendment rights during trial based on the representations that have been made by a lead prosecutor in this case. His name is Gordon Kromberg. And he told this court, he told the extradition, the district court that was reviewing the extradition, he told them that Julian Assange is a foreign national, and that an argument that could be made is that he is not entitled to First Amendment rights. And so that caught the attention of the High Court of Justice. And the High Court of Justice said, and I'm just going to read this to you, that since Assange wishes to argue at trial if he was granted First Amendment rights, then the prosecution would be stopped. Then, quote, the First Amendment is therefore of central importance to his defense to the extradition charge. Further, if he is convicted, he may wish to invoke the First Amendment on the question of sentence if he is not permitted to rely on the First Amendment. Because of his status as a foreign national, he will thereby be prejudiced, potentially very greatly prejudiced, by reason of his nationality. And as I said, they pointed to this argument that was made, this or the statement that was put forward by Kromberg, and said that since Kromberg was providing authoritative assistance on how the First Amendment would apply to Julian Assange, then, quote, it can be fairly assumed that he would not have said that the prosecution could argue that foreign nationals are not entitled to protections under the First Amendment unless that was a tenable argument that the prosecution was entitled to deploy with a real prospect of success. And if such an argument were to succeed, it would at least arguably cause the applicant, which is Julian Assange, prejudice on the grounds of his non-U.S. citizenship and hence on the grounds of his nationality. And under extradition law, he's supposed to have the same fair access to justice and the same rights to freedom of expression. And since he would have, it would appear, more limited rights to freedom of expression as a foreign national, that is something that has led the High Court of Justice, to go and grant an appeal hearing probably later this summer. We don't have an exact date, but probably later this summer there will be an appeal hearing, and it'll be likely a few hours like today and around this question of First Amendment issues. You can't bring new evidence into the case. You can't raise new questions. It'll just be limited on this thing of Julian Assange wishing to claim First Amendment rights, but being denied, most likely at a U.S. trial. And so let me play this clip of Marjorie Cohn, who is a law professor. She's the former president of the National Lawyers Guild, and she's had a very good analysis of, and her prediction has proven to be correct, that the U.S. government did have a difficult time convincing the High Court of Justice that this was an airtight assurance, that because he would be able to bring a First Amendment challenge to the charges during trial, that was good enough to convince the High Court not to allow Julian Assange an appeal. Well, as it turns out, the High Court of Justice sided against the U.S. government and their assurance today. So let's play this. This is, as I said, Marjorie Cohn, and I think she has a pretty good analysis of the First Amendment issues that are at stake here.
So I think that it is going to be difficult for the United States to give airtight assurances that Julian Assange will be able to mount a First Amendment free expression defense, that he does have a right to free expression, and that he will not be charged with the death penalty offense, particularly on the latter point, because the Supreme Court in 2020 held that it is long settled as a matter of American constitutional law that foreign citizens outside the United States territory do not possess rights under the U.S. Constitution. That's the U.S. Supreme Court. So how is the U.S. government, the Department of so-called Justice, going to come forward here and say, well, yes, he will get First Amendment rights? So I think there is a tremendous room for argument, assuming that the judges rather, in the UK hearing in May, if it gets that far, if Biden doesn't decide at the last minute to offer a plea bargain, so he won't be embarrassed if and when Julian Assange is extradited to the US in the middle of Biden's campaign, that it's not an open and shut thing. I mean, I must admit that I agree that when I first read this decision by the High Court, I thought, oh my gosh, they've given the Department of Justice an out. But I'm not so sure that that out is so airtight, and so it's not over till it's over.
And that's a really fair point. And as reflected in the High Court of Justice granting this appeal hearing on this question, I don't know if the US government can tell the High Court of Justice what it wants to hear. And as I go through the submission, as I go through and I read what they shared with the court, and as they're trying to convince the High Court that Julian Assange would not be prejudiced and face unfair proceedings because he does not have First Amendment rights, it is stunning to think that they might get caught in this and not be able to save their extradition request, or that they might lose at the High Court of Justice level and then have to file an appeal at the Supreme Court level. And I'm not sure if they get a better chance at saving the extradition before the Supreme Court, since there's finality to it. There will be no other place for Julian Assange to go, no more appeals. But this is what they write. In the present case, the reason put forward by Assange, but not conceded as correct, is that Assange would be prejudiced at trial by reason of his being a non-US citizen, because the US prosecutor indicated in a sentence contained within hundreds of pages of declarations, and they rehash what I said about Kronberg concerning any First Amendment challenge. The United States could argue that foreign nationals are not entitled to protections under the First Amendment, at least as it concerns national defense information. And national defense information is a universe of information that isn't only classified information, but also includes sensitive but unclassified information. It's a wider category that is a construct of a Justice Department and construct of the security apparatus and military agencies. Critical language that Assange does not highlight follows, and so they emphasize that it would be unprotected conduct because he's complicit in illegal acts and in publishing the names of innocent sources to their grave and imminent risk of harm. Okay, well then, going down here, they say the position of the U.S. prosecutor is that no one, neither U.S. citizens nor foreign citizens, are entitled to rely on the First Amendment in relation to publication of illegally obtained national defense information, giving the names of innocent sources to their grave and imminent risk of harm. What does that mean? It essentially means that the US government is opposing the Pentagon Papers. is opposing the publication of materials that get published by the news media on a regular basis. And they're essentially saying that there is a wide swath of national security journalism that is not protected by the First Amendment. And perhaps it's true that the Supreme Court would rule against the publication of this kind of information, but making this determination that the information is illegally published and obtained because it could endanger sources, that's not really how the First Amendment writes. There is no law in the United States against publishing classified information with the names of sources. Those who follow me and listen to my discussion of this case might have heard at some point during the last 5 years a mention of a law that was supported by Joe Lieberman and other senators when he was a senator. And this small group, tried to pass a law that would have made it a crime to publish information that outed intelligence sources. It was a response to WikiLeaks in 2010. It didn't pass. It did not pass. There is no law on the books in the United States that can be called an Official Secrets Act. The Espionage Act is being used by Justice Department prosecutors like an Official Secrets Act, like the Official Secrets Act in Britain, but it is not. And there's not a law that just says any U.S. citizen is committing a crime when they publish classified information. It's one thing for a person who's an employee and a contractor who signs a security clearance, non-disclosure agreement. The non-disclosure agreement for a security clearance, they might make some promises to their superior officers or the supervisors that they will not disclose information so that they can have their security clearance. That's what they have to do. Journalists don't do that. They do not have security clearances, and then when they receive those materials, on one hand, they don't always have the knowledge and expertise to assess the contents, which is where having sources is important, but they're also not required to keep that information secret. They're not required to return it to the U.S. government. If it's the U.S. government's position is that it's stolen or it's leaked material that should be returned to them, I think that's what they would prefer to see happen. Journalists don't do that, of course, because information in the public interest should be shared, and the forcing of transparency is the one small way and one of the few ways remaining to hold officials accountable. When officials who are in power don't hold themselves accountable, don't allow oversight, undermine oversight, frustrate efforts to make sure that they are doing the things that they said they would do, or that they are not engaged in crimes or wrongdoing, the public is supposed to benefit from the press having this information so that, generally speaking, crimes and wrongdoing is exposed. And that's exactly what we were finding when you looked at the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq through these war log documents that were published, when you saw the U.S. diplomatic cables from the State Department. It was the exposure of acts that were not defensible or criminal. Broadly speaking, there were things in these documents that officials would have a tough time defending out in the open when questioned by the news media or lawmakers or the public. Like, if they had the guts to do a town hall and someone objected, these were things that they would probably have a tough time justifying out in the open. So So this hearing on the First Amendment is about Julian Assange's right to freedom of expression. The US government doesn't have a satisfactory response to the High Court of Justice's concern. And it's possible that they're scrambling now to figure out how they deal with this because the extradition law is clear in the UK. And if the High Court of Justice is identifying this as an arguable issue, it seems like it's kind of a catch-22, and I'm not going to help the U.S. government untangle it. I'll just sit back and watch and see if they are able to figure it out. And if you care about freedom of the press and seeing Assange be released as I do, you hope that they aren't able to come up with a good answer to the High Court of Justice's concern. And so the death penalty assurance, that was accepted by the Assange legal team. They accepted that the executive branch has the power to not impose the death penalty against Julian Assange. It can make that promise to the High Court. They have to accept it. And so his team decided that there will not be any death penalty attached to this prosecution. And different from the First Amendment assurance, because they are not in any position to assure that he will have First Amendment rights, because that's a court decision, and the courts are going to look at prior cases and make a determination that truly, since he has no ties to the US and is a foreign national, he probably won't have First Amendment protections. This is the conundrum. And I do not have any sympathy or care that there are going to be bureaucrats at the Justice Department that have to figure out how to unsnarl this. And so Julian Assange has a small opening. These are small openings. These are cracks in the facade. They have come every so often in the last 5-7 years. And this is one that you should welcome if you are someone who believes that Julian Assange should be freed. If you believe in global press freedom, if you care about these things, then you have to, believe that this is something that is good. It's hard to celebrate because he remains in prison. He's not going to be released from Belmarsh while awaiting this limited appeal hearing. But with that being said, it's what the Assange legal team wanted to see happen. And you could argue that they made a calculated choice to not object to the death penalty assurance and act like the US government was putting forward a promise in bad faith, because they could see that the First Amendment assurance was so poor, so shoddy, so ill-constructed that it wouldn't take much to demonstrate to the High Court that they needed to have a hearing on this matter and allow an appeal. Any kind of an appeal is a defeat for the US government, because they wanted to see the High Court of Justice slam the door shut on this extradition case, and that there would be no further extradition proceedings in UK courts. Although there is an overhang, and this isn't the thing that is dragging the Biden White House and the wider US government down anymore. I mean, it doesn't come close to being as shameful and repugnant as the conduct of the US in the support of Israel's war on Gaza. And we're seeing that play out in an international legal context, with unprecedented warrants being issued not only for Hamas leaders, but also for Israel, their leader, Benjamin Netanyahu, and then the defense minister, Yoav Gallant. And so this is a first, the U.S. having to deal with Israel facing these arrest warrants. Nothing will likely come of it. That doesn't mean that there will be any proceedings where the IC actually holds Israel officials accountable. But what it does bring us to is that the ICC has been a target of lawfare and threats, and that is connected to this case, and that the Julian Assange himself exposed the very threats and the actions to subvert and undermine international law and international legal bodies to prevent other countries from challenging U.S. crimes, holding soldiers or former CIA officials or CIA agents accountable for rendition and torture. That this is part of the universe of revelations from the WikiLeaks publications, which Julian Assange has been put on trial. He's been put on trial for making available to the entire world. And so while we sit here and discuss the extradition case against Julian Assange, there is an understanding of how far the U.S. will go to make sure that the U.S. and its close allies are not held accountable for war crimes, because we have evidence from documents that were published by WikiLeaks. And I think that's so important to make that connection and just emphasize that aspect of where this case fits into global news events. All throughout the last 5 years, and particularly in this year, you truly feel how Assange is at the center of all that seems to happen with the United States as a global superpower. That if you want to understand what the US will go, how it will engage in aggression and naked acts of power, you just look at what has come to the fore through this Assange prosecution. And then it doesn't take much to understand why the Biden White House is unmoved by the evidence of atrocities that have been committed by Israeli military forces, and how they defend supporting and continue to send billions of dollars worth of arms shipments to Israel for attacking defenseless people, Palestinians who are living through a full-blown famine. It's not hard to figure out why they would be opposed to the International Criminal Court trying to investigate war crimes by Israel. It's not hard to figure out why they would be afraid if the US has to think twice about arming certain governments, because then that means that there are military companies that don't have the kind of profit-making possibilities that they had before. So if those governments, if the U.S. can't send U.S. weaponry to Israel, how many less in terms of like millions, tens of millions of dollars would we see going to Northrop Grumman, Boeing, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics? Go down the list. This is central. So I'm going to conclude here, and I thank you all for tuning in to this shorter broadcast. I'll be back later in the week. I want to say again that if you go to thedissenter.org, you will find a report that will be filed by Mohammed Almazi, the reporter we hired who was there at court proceedings. And it'll be shared with subscribers. And so if you sign up, it's free newsletter. although there are paid subscribers, but there are free articles that are published there. If you sign up, you'll get the report on today's proceedings. If you don't want to read the establishment news media's break. And then, as always, if you value this independent journalism, maybe kick in a few bucks here so we can continue to bring you this indispensable reporting, whether it comes from me or Chip. We have been recognized for the work that we do on this case. I'm the author of the book Guilty of Journalism: The Political Case Against Julian Assange. It's the only book on what is happening now that has been published by an author in the United States, and it's a guide to everything that you see unfolding. Picking it up, reading it would give you an immediate grasp of what the UK courts and the UK and the US governments are doing to Assange by allowing this prosecution and this extradition case to just keep on trucking without any end in sight. That punishment by process, the legal limbo in which Julian Assange finds himself, it's grinding him down. And so, to conclude with the person himself who is at the center of this, Julian Assange was not present at these proceedings. His health was too poor to be at this hearing. Another day in which Julian Assange does not participate in the proceedings against him because he is unwell. And that is what this case is doing to the former WikiLeaks editor-in-chief. The good news is that the support for him and the calls to end this case are louder than ever. The demands to free him are louder than ever. The clarity from people who know better and should speak up, it's now apparent that they are willing to step forward. There are people who weren't as vocal who are now speaking out. There are open letters by coalitions. There are a few dozen Congress people, representatives that are finally stepping up. There's a resolution in the House to demand that if you support freedom of the press, you oppose this Justice Department prosecution and demand that they drop the charges. And that is a step forward. That is progress when it comes to the campaign to free Julian Assange. And if I can figure out how to do that and show a QR code with the donate link, I will do it. That is beyond my knowledge, but if anybody has any advice on how to do that with a QR code, something easy. Remember, I have a lot of work to do. My primary focus is to cover the news here and devote my energy to the reporting and editing that is necessary in getting out articles and then spending time doing a video like this. But the address for the newsletter is newsletter@thedissenter.org. So if you have know how to do a QR code with the donate link, I could start putting that on the screen. I just don't have the expertise to do that. But that's a good suggestion, Ludo, and I wish I had somebody I could go to set all of that up. There's a lot that I would do with this channel and with broadcasting, but I don't because I operate on a pretty shoestring budget. So thanks everyone for tuning in and understanding what's at stake and what we are losing every day that Julian Assange remains in a jail cell. Yeah, I could. You're right. So thank you everyone for tuning in to this broadcast. Thanks for the suggestions, the constructive suggestions on how to improve the show. I thank you for being here, and I will be back soon later in the week with a longer broadcast covering some other issues that are perhaps entirely unrelated to Julian Assange, and you can see me then. Until that time, good luck to you, and take care of yourselves.